The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle.
Speaker. Today I will be speaking about Bill S2, an act to amend the Motor Vehicle Safety Act, otherwise known as the Strengthening Motor Vehicle Safety for Canadians Act. The safety of Canadians is of high importance to this government, and this bill will help further ensure Canadians can enjoy peace of mind while driving on our roads. The rapid development of automated and connected technologies for light-duty vehicles is of great interest to this government. And indeed, this summer I had the pleasure of attending the conference of governors, U.S. governors in Rhode Island, where we were treated to a talk by Elon Musk, the owner of Tesla, about the advent of fully autonomous vehicles, ones that can fully drive themselves without the aid of a driver. He predicts, indeed, that this type of vehicle will replace human-operated cars in the next 15 years. So enjoy your cars while you can. Prototypes of some of these vehicles are already undergoing on-road testing in the U.S., and this exciting area of vehicle technology development can be seen as both a safety benefit and an economic innovation opportunity. Shifts in the global technology landscape are placing a growing reliance on vehicle safety innovation while transforming business practices and consumer demands. These emerging and disruptive technologies offer promising opportunities for economic, safety, and environmental benefits, as well as a number of regulatory challenges. The challenge is that the pace of change associated with these technologies and how they are transforming the motor vehicle sector is rapidly increasing while the regulatory process remains unchanged. Mr. Speaker, new technologies offer promising opportunities for improving road transportation, including the environmental impact of vehicles. However, these technologies can be challenging in terms of safety oversight. Much of the technological safety of a vehicle cannot be seen by the naked eye. From the outside, two vehicles may look the same, but many of the safety elements are internal to the structure or operating system of the vehicle. Safety standards include those related to crash worthiness and crash avoidance. Crash worthiness, or how to survive once you're in a collision, standards include those related to front and side impact. As we shift to new technologies and building materials, we need to ensure that this survivability is not compromised. Personally, I prefer the second element of crash avoidance. These crash avoidance technologies allow drivers to detect and avoid collisions. One example of such a technology is electronic stability control, which has been mandated on new vehicles since 2011. For this type of technology, we need to ensure that the promises made by developers are accurate, as consumers will be relying on these technologies. The speed and scope at which new technologies are being developed and implemented is challenging the status quo and is testing government's ability to respond in a timely manner. Canadian industry and businesses need to understand, adopt, and deploy new innovations and business models to stay competitive and better position Canada for success in leveraging the full potential of emerging and disruptive technologies. Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to hear some of the debate on S2, and many of the issues that are involved in S2 have already been discussed in full, including the Auditor General's report from 2016, report number 4, which my honourable friend and the Chair of Public Accounts, the member from Battle River Crowfoot, discussed yesterday at length. So I will be limiting my time today to the regulatory issues that are involved in S2. So motor vehicle technologies and how they are regulated, this is what I want to focus on here today. The legislation needs to be flexible and adaptive to promote Canadian leadership and to give Canadians access to these new technologies as quickly as practically possible. The regulations are aimed at keeping Canadians safe, but they cannot be so rigid that they delay the introduction of new vehicle safety technologies or fuel systems. So there's a balance to be struck there. Mr. Speaker, these proposed improvements to the Motor Vehicle Safety Act have been developed to address these and a number of other important challenges. Currently, the Motor Vehicle Safety Act includes a provision for interim orders. An interim order allows Canadian regulation that corresponds to a foreign regulation to be suspended or modified if there is a change by that foreign government. Currently, interim orders can only suspend or modify a Canadian regulation for 1 year, which does not reflect that some regulations could take longer to develop, particularly if they deal with a very technical subject matter. As such, Bill S2 proposes to extend the period of an interim order to 3 years to reflect the typical length of time required to complete the full regulatory process for such a technical requirement. The bill also introduces suspension orders, which allow for the suspension or modification of existing Canadian regulations. For this type of order, a foreign government's enactment or regulation is not required. In this way, Canada has a tool to lead the way in regulatory development to address new and emerging technologies. This process permits the Minister of Transport to allow newer technology solutions, when appropriate, to take effect more quickly. The order would be in place for up to 3 years. Mr. Speaker, both of these tools will increase the flexibility of the Motor Vehicle Safety Act to address an ever-changing landscape related to the automotive industry. These orders will be published and will apply to all manufacturers equally in order to provide a level playing field. Another tool that is currently available in the Motor Vehicle Safety Act is an exemption order. These orders allow the minister to exempt a model of vehicle from a regulation. Currently, exemption orders are only valid for 1 year and require approval from the Governor and Council. An exemption is requested by the regulated body, and it is up to that entity to demonstrate that safety is not negatively affected. An example of this type of request would be if a manufacturer applied to, say, not meet a rear view mirror regulation in order to install instead a rear view camera that performed the same function or improved on the existing function. As these requests are very technical in nature under these proposed changes, the minister would be given the power to decide, based on the best evidence, and I would think common sense, whether it is in the interest of safety to grant the exemption. The duration of the exemption would apply for 3 years to allow sufficient time to determine what technical regulatory requirements would be appropriate and to allow time for the manufacturer to implement and use the proposed technology. The exemption would only apply on that model of vehicle, but the exemption would be made public. Again, this is very important, allowing other manufacturers to be knowledgeable about options for advancing their own technologies. In summary, Madam Speaker, excusez-moi, the automotive industry is changing very rapidly, and vehicle technologies are making vehicles safer and more fuel efficient. However, these changes are challenging our regulatory capacity to assess and apply them in the Canadian context in a timely fashion. This Act includes a number of tools to allow adoption of regulations already available in another country and the ability to create new short-term regulatory changes in advance of the full regulation being available. Madam Speaker, this represents a new regulatory process for Canada for the next century and will increase safety and fuel efficiency on our roads and help Canada be an important player for the next generation of automobile innovation. Madam Speaker, I neglected at the top of my time to say that I would be sharing my time, and I'm sorry to say I do not know who I will be sharing it with, but if there is another speaker, I will be sharing that time. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires?
L'honorable député. The honourable member for Beauport-Limoilou. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to ask my colleague, with whom I've already sat together on committee, whether, well, we've already approved the bill to this point, and so I have some questions that I will be raising in greater depth when I give my speech. But for now, I'd like to ask my colleague, does she not believe that this bill gives perhaps a bit too much discretionary power to the Minister of Transport? Thank you.
The honourable member for Châteauguay-Lacolle.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague from across the way as well, because I remember when we had the discussion in committee about the problems with the Department of Transport Canada, particularly when it came to the implementation of the regulations. There had been some quite rapid changes. Now, we know that the automobile industry never stopped innovating, but in recent years, that innovation has been happening at a rate that outpaces the ability of the transport department's ability to keep up. Now, between 2010 and 2016, which is a fairly significant period of time, there was a report done. And it was noted that when there were changes in the US or in Europe, for example, it took a lot of time, I would say too much time, for Canada's Department of Transport to deal with those changes. Now, the department explained the reasons for that, but if in Europe or in the US, if they felt that it was important to have certain regulations, well, we use the same vehicles, and it's important that we act more quickly so that we can ensure the public safety of Canadians by giving that power to the minister.
Questions et commentaires?
Questions and comments?
L'honorable
The Honourable Member for Beauport, Côte de Beaupré, l'Île d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I thank my colleague for her speech. I have a few questions to ask her. Given that there were changes made by the Senate to this bill, and I also think that a lot of power is being given to the Minister of Transport, well, I'd like to ask my colleague, Madam Speaker, whether she doesn't think that too much power is being given to the minister. The Honourable Member for Château-Galacol. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd also like to thank my colleague across the way. Well, as far as the amendments made by the Senate are concerned, it's clear that they have to do with the terms of the contract between suppliers and manufacturers. So this is an attempt, perhaps a well-intentioned attempt, to solve a problem within the industry. So if there are safety problems with vehicles that have already been delivered to the dealership, then they wouldn't be given a fine. But that is really external to this bill, which focuses on the safety of Canadians. And that's something that the government cares about as well. So it's logical that it would be the Minister of Transport who would have that responsibility.
Prise de débat.
Resuming debate.
L'honorable député de Beauport.
The honourable member for Beauport-Limoilou.